At the special couples ball, my wife introduced another man as her partner, not me. So I went to them and announced the divorce, with the calm of someone who already understood everything. The hall erupted in applause, but inside me there was only silence. I left the party and our marriage right there. "You two are a perfect match in disrespect," were my only words. She tried to contact me later, but the lover disappeared when he realized there was no future. Alone, she faced the weight of her own mistake. I rebuilt my life without haste, found a new love with sincere eyes and loyal gestures. When she came to me to apologize, I listened to her with respect. I forgave her not because she deserved it, but because I needed to move on lightly. And I did, with peace in my heart. She was left with regret, I with freedom. Each on their own path, as it should have been since that ball. But what no one ever knew was everything that happened behind the scenes that night. How long it took me to reach that calm. How much it hurt to recognize that someone I swore to love, protect, and build a whole life with was precisely the person who, day after day, silently tore me away. Betrayal never begins with a kiss, it begins with distance, with averted glances, with routine excuses that become so predictable that we pretend not to see them so we don't have to admit it's happening. I saw it. Every detail. But I stayed. I stayed because I thought it was just a phase, that the love we had was strong enough to endure it. I stayed out of fear of losing them and discovering it was just a passing mistake. I stayed because no one ever teaches us to leave when the other person is already gone. I stayed until I no longer recognized myself. I knew. Long before that night. Before the dance, before the invitation was even delivered. I knew from the new clothes that suddenly appeared in the closet, from the discreet smiles when the cell phone vibrated, from the rush to leave, from the lack of rush to return. I knew, and yet I stayed there, trying to fix what was already broken. Trying to revive a pulseless body, feeding a blind hope that slowly burned me. And the worst part is that, amidst the pain, I still felt guilty. I wondered where I went wrong, what I failed to do, what could have been different. I sank into doubts that had no answers, while she surrendered to what seemed to be her new world. And even realizing this, I continued to love. We love even after disrespect, even after neglect. The heart, unfortunately, is foolish. And that's why it hurts so much. On the night of the ball, I knew she would be with him. I was prepared. Not for a fight, not to confront or beg for answers. I went in peace. A hard, bitter peace, the kind only those who have cried all they had to cry understand. I entered the ballroom with a shielded heart, because there was no more room for illusions inside. When I saw them entering hand in hand, smiling as if it were natural, as if years of history could be replaced by weeks of euphoria, I felt the pain of mourning. But I remained still. Because that was no longer my place, and I needed to accept that. She saw me. Her gaze met mine as if she had forgotten, for a moment, that I existed. And when she approached, without hesitation, and introduced him as her date, it was like a final stab. But it didn't hurt as much as I imagined. There was no more room for pain there. Only an immense emptiness, an inner silence that numbed me. I just smiled slightly and said what needed to be said. You two are a perfect match when it comes to disrespect. And that was all. The party continued, people laughed, danced, toasted. The irony of life is that sometimes the world celebrates while your heart crumbles. I left the ball, I left the wedding, I left everything. Outside, in the cold of the night, I breathed as if reborn. For the first time in a long time, I breathed like someone free. But freedom also hurts. Because you leave prison, but you carry the scars. In the following days, she tried to contact me. She sent messages, made calls, tried to justify herself. I read them, but didn't respond. Because no justification would bring back what she broke. No explanation would erase the bitter taste of being replaced without warning, of being discarded so easily. And even so, I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her ill. I just let go. Because I understood that remaining trapped in that was only prolonging my own suffering. She thought what she had with him was love. Maybe she even believed it. The heart confuses intensity with truth. But the first challenge, the first sign that it wasn't as easy as it seemed, was enough for him to disappear. Without drama, without guilt. He simply left. He left her with the promises he made, the plans they created, and the loneliness she herself chose. And that's when the real punishment began. Because there is no greater loneliness than realizing you threw away something real for a fleeting illusion. She sought me out months later. Sitting before me, her eyes downcast and her voice choked with emotion, she apologized. She didn't try to justify herself this time. She simply said she was very sorry. That she understood now. That she realized that true love is the kind that stays when everything else goes away. I listened. Attentively, respectfully. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because I needed to end things the right way. I forgave her. But not so she could move on in peace. I forgave her so I could move on lightly. And I did. Without looking back. Time passed, and without haste, I found someone new. Someone who didn't need to try hard to make me smile again. A calm, loyal love that didn't need to be proven every day because it was felt in every gesture. I discovered that love doesn't have to hurt. That true love doesn't make you wonder if it's enough. And there, beside someone who arrived whole, I rebuilt myself. Not as before, but better. Stronger. More aware. More myself. She tried to come back. Too late. What was once hers no longer existed. She kept the memories, I kept the freedom. And perhaps that's the worst kind of loss, the kind you only understand when it's too late to recover. Because the love she had, that true love, the kind that waited even in the face of absence, the kind that forgave the silences and still tried every day, that love died on the day of the prom. And nothing she could say or do would be enough to bring it back. But there's something nobody knows. A final part of this story that only I know. Something that happened before the ball, that perhaps explains everything. A silent discovery that changed the course of my decisions. Something she never imagined I knew. And it's this revelation that changes everything. Because in that wedding, in that betrayal, on that night, there was much more than just a broken heart. There was a detail that, to this day, she doesn't know. A detail that made me see clearly. And it's because of this detail that, when she introduced that man as her date, I already knew that nothing held me there anymore. Not her. Not the past. Not the doubt. There's only one thing she never discovered. And perhaps, if he had discovered it, he would have understood that her betrayal began long before she crossed her arms with another man. And that's the truth no one expects. Because the greatest betrayal isn't always physical. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's abandonment disguised as routine. And sometimes it's realizing that the one you loved most had already left, while still sleeping beside you. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize and, we never support any form of betrayal. The stories told are fictional, but based on real pain points that show how a wrong choice can destroy homes, hearts, and futures. Our mission is clear: to reflect, to feel, and never to forget. Loyalty is the foundation of any true love. Now, take a deep breath. Because what you're going to hear is shocking, profound, and unforgettable. Get ready. The story is about to begin. It was easy to like them. A couple who seemed to have stepped out of an old portrait, the kind grandparents keep in gilded frames above the fireplace. When they walked together, they seemed to have the same rhythm, as if their steps were choreographed by the intimacy that years together had built. Ethan was a man of calm gestures, the kind who listens before responding, who pays attention even to silences. He always had a firm but gentle gaze, and the kind of smile that made any disagreement seem less serious. Olivia, on the other hand, had the energy of someone who arrived first in any room. Intelligent, persuasive, full of strong opinions, but with a disarming sweetness. When they met, she said Ethan was her anchor, and he swore Olivia was the most beautiful storm that had ever hit him. Together, they found balance. He was the tranquility she needed. She was the intensity he never knew he lacked. Friends said it was rare to see a couple with such emotional connection and mutual respect. And for a long time, that's exactly how it was. They lived in a simple house, but one full of life. Every corner held a memory: the first plant they tried to care for together, which died in less than a week, the hallway wall where they pasted photos of trips, birthdays, lazy Sundays, the sofa with red wine stains, the cupboard with an old post-it note that read, "Don't forget to smile today." They were small details, but they added up to a story lived with truth. In the late afternoons, he used to cook while she put on some old playlist, and between pots and pans and music, they laughed at jokes that only made sense between the two of them. There was an intimacy forged in everyday life, in sharing time, in the complicity of their glances. They had difficult moments, of course. Like any real couple. Arguments about the future, about financial decisions, about how to train the dog that insisted on destroying the cushions. But even in conflicts, there was respect. Ethan never raised his voice. Olivia, despite her intense temperament, knew when to back down. It wasn't a perfect relationship, it never was, but it was built on truth, on presence. And that, for both of them, was always the most important thing. Their relationship began in their youth. They were still discovering who they were in the world when they met. Ethan, always more reserved, worked in technology and had a stable, almost predictable routine. Olivia, on the other hand, was in the creative field. She changed her mind frequently, reinventing herself with each new professional passion. In the beginning, many doubted they would last. They said that such opposite personalities would burn out quickly. But they proved otherwise. Over time, they learned each other's language. Ethan came to admire Olivia's passionate chaos, and she found comfort in his stability. They became more than a couple, they were a team. They spent years building that foundation. They shared debts, dreams, and losses. They cried together over the death of their first dog. They rejoiced at the acquisition of their first car in joint ownership. They had mutual friends, long dinners with too much wine and too many confessions. They shared the kind of affection that can't be photographed. Small gestures like the way she adjusted his shirt collar before going out, or how he left notes in books she hadn't even started reading yet. It was these details that, over the years, transformed a romantic relationship into a life partnership. Life as a couple, however, began to change without them clearly realizing when. Perhaps it was after the pandemic, when many homes began to seem smaller, more suffocating. Perhaps it was when their rhythms began to clash. Ethan wanted silence, peace, late afternoons in the backyard. Olivia began to crave excitement again, new experiences, new circles. But this wasn't seen as a problem at first. She said she just needed fresh air to reconnect with herself. And he, as always, understood. He was never one to hold back. He was never one to demand. He believed that love was precisely about allowing the other to be whole, even if that meant temporary distance. Ethan never stopped trying. Even during the phases when she seemed more distant, more focused on staying away from home, he remained constant. He wasn't the type to make grand gestures or declarations, but his presence was firm. He was there, in all the coffees he prepared before she woke up, in the trips to the market, in the invitations to movies that she always refused, claiming she was too tired. It was love showing itself in the ordinary. Olivia, on the other hand, seemed increasingly thirsty for novelty. She started going out with old friends, coming home late, talking about new projects. And he supported her. He always supported her. Because he trusted her. And because he loved her as few people in life love someone, accepting even what they don't understand. Friends noticed some changes, but no one dared comment. After all, they had been together for so long. Who could imagine that something could shake a story with such deep roots? She continued to smile at gatherings, he remained present. On the outside, the structure still seemed firm. But those who live inside a house know when the cracks begin. And Ethan knew. He felt it in the colder touch, in the haste with which she now answered calls in the other room, in the excuses to go to bed earlier or to go out alone. Still, he remained silent. He believed that perhaps it was just a phase, that time and care would heal it. He was a man who never knew how to give up easily. As the months passed, the differences between them became more visible. He tried to revive old rituals, suggesting short trips, dinners for two, trying to rekindle conversations that used to last until the early hours of the morning. But everything seemed to run up against a subtle resistance, almost imperceptible to an outsider, but sharp to those who felt it inside. Olivia smiled less. She got irritated easily. Often, she seemed absent even when she was there. And although Ethan noticed, he kept trying. His love was still greater than the pain of uncertainty. Despite this, Olivia wasn't a villain. There was a genuine conflict within her. She loved Ethan deeply, but silently began to wonder if that love was enough for everything she now wanted to feel. She began to lose herself, searching for something she couldn't even name. And the more she searched, the further she drifted away from him. Her mistake wasn't feeling doubt, it was remaining silent about it. It was continuing to receive his love as if everything were fine, while she plunged alone into new desires. She couldn't explain it herself. It was as if life was asking her for a new beginning, but the price was too high. In that silent tension, the days went by. And then came the invitation to the ball. An event celebrating long-term couples, organized by mutual friends. It was an old tradition, bringing together stories of love and companionship. It would be the 5th time they attended. But that year, something was different. Ethan was excited. He saw the event as a chance for reconnection. He talked about the outfits, about old songs, about dancing with her again like in the early years. Olivia smiled, but not with her eyes. She said she would see if she could go. He interpreted it as tiredness. Once again, he understood. On the eve of the ball, Olivia left early. She said she needed to take care of some things. Ethan spent the day organizing everything. He picked out the clothes he would wear, chose the music he wanted to play while they danced. He felt something strange in his chest, but refused to name it. He preferred to believe. He always preferred to believe. When night fell, she still hadn't returned. And that's when he decided to go alone. Because, despite everything, he still felt that this story deserved his presence. Even if it was just his. Even if it was the last time. What Ethan saw that night would change everything. But he was no longer the same. Something inside him had broken long ago. That night would only be the confirmation. A painful but necessary confirmation. The silence that had haunted him for months would finally transform into a decision. But that belongs to future chapters. He arrived a few minutes after the ceremony began, as if he were in no hurry, but also without any hesitation. The hall was already full, decorated with golden lights, candles on the round tables, and a string quartet filling the space with light music. Couples exchanged nostalgic glances, some danced with the lightness of those who know each other's every step. Ethan crossed the space with a serene and restrained air. His gaze sought only one thing, or rather, two, her, and the confirmation of what he already intuited. When his eyes finally landed on Olivia, he didn't react as he perhaps had in other times. She was stunning, in a navy blue dress that highlighted her fair skin and her hair delicately styled. There was a sparkle in her eyes that he recognized, a sparkle that had once been exclusive to the moments when she looked at him with admiration. But that night, that look wasn't for him. She saw him, and for a brief moment, she froze. Just a second, but enough to convey the tension. The hand that held the man's beside her seemed to waver, but she quickly regained her composure, as if she could no longer turn back. Ethan continued forward. His steps were slow, firm, as if he knew that this night needed no haste, only clarity. As he approached the two, he didn't make a scene, didn't shout, didn't question. He simply looked into her eyes and said, with the calm of someone who already knew everything, that he was there to announce the divorce. Not out of anger, nor pride, but because he had finally understood that love doesn't survive where there is no reciprocity. "You two are a perfect match in disrespect," was the only sentence he left behind before leaving. And he left. He left the hall, the party, the story. What Olivia never imagined, and what cruelly and unexpectedly changed everything, was that Ethan had known for weeks about her involvement with that man. He found out not by chance, but through a painful discovery. She had exchanged confidences with this man using an old email profile, which she swore she had forgotten. But she hadn't deleted the access, and he, while trying to resolve financial issues linked to the account, stumbled upon messages that no partner should see. Dialogues that left no room for doubt. Plans. Laughter. Dates. A parallel life built with the lightness of someone who believed she would never be discovered. But what broke Ethan wasn't the details of the encounter, but the words used to describe him. She spoke of him, the man who had once been everything to her, with disdain. She said he was predictable, that she needed more. She said she felt suffocated by the stability, as if the love built over the years had become a prison. Ethan didn't react immediately. He read everything in silence. He cried, yes, but not from anger. He cried for the slow death of something he was still trying to keep alive. And then, instead of confronting her, he decided to listen. To observe. He wanted to understand how far she would go with this. For days, she continued living beside him as if nothing had changed. She touched him, smiled sometimes, responded with brief kisses before rushing out. But she never returned in time for dinner. Ethan, even hurt, decided to let her dig her own abyss alone. And that's when his decision began to take shape. He wouldn't make a scene, he wouldn't ask for explanations. If she didn't have the courage to be honest, he would have the dignity to leave. But what Olivia didn't know, what even the man beside her at the ball didn't know, was the weight of what she had lost. Because Ethan, with all the love he had planned something that would change both their lives. 2 weeks before that night, he was about to give her a fresh start project, the trip she had always dreamed of, the chance to open her own design studio, financed with some of the money he had secretly saved for years. He wanted to surprise her. To show her that even after so much time, he still believed in their future. But after reading those messages, he knew it would be useless. Nothing more he did would have value to someone who already silently discarded him. He cancelled everything. Silently. He kept the tickets, closed the investment, and began planning his exit. And all this while still preparing her morning coffee. For Ethan, the night of the ball was the final act. A farewell without the need for final words. When he saw her introduce that man as her date, he understood that any trace of regret had been buried. And so, in saying what he said, he wasn't trying to hurt her, only to free her. And himself. But that wasn't what Olivia expected. When she saw him leave without looking back, something inside her crumbled. Something she didn't even know still existed. Because, contrary to what she thought, she didn't feel free. She felt exposed. And, for the first time, empty. In the following days, she tried to contact him. She sent messages, showed up at his house. But she didn't find him. He had moved to a small rented apartment, leaving no visible trace. He did this because he knew he needed silence to heal. Olivia then began to notice the details she had ignored. How constant he was. How, even in the most difficult moments, he was still there. She began to realize that the love she had lost was the kind of love that cannot be found again. She began to reread old messages, search for photos, revisit memories that now seemed more vivid than ever. But it was too late. A month later, she went to a mutual friend's house. She needed something, anything to reconnect her with that man. And that's where she found out. Her friend, unaware of anything, mentioned the cancelled trip, the studio, the plan Ethan was preparing for her. She said he was excited, that he spoke about it with a sparkle in his eyes. Upon hearing this, Olivia was devastated. She sat on the sofa, her hands covering her face, murmuring that she didn't know. She cried like she hadn't cried in a long time. Because that's when she understood, he wasn't predictable. He was loyal. And loyalty, she now knew, was what she truly lacked. When she finally found him, she was met with surprise, but without hostility. Ethan listened to her. He let her speak. And she spoke. She confessed everything. She said she didn't know what she was looking for. That she got lost. That she thought she needed something different. That she didn't realize what she had until she lost it. Ethan listened to her until the end. And then, with calm eyes, he said that he had already forgiven her. But not for her sake. For his own. Because he didn't want to carry that weight. He didn't want to turn resentment into a scar. But he also didn't want her in his life anymore. It was at that moment that Olivia realized that the worst punishment isn't abandonment. It's the indifference of someone who once loved you deeply. Ethan wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He was at peace. And that destroyed her inside. Because she finally understood that she had lost the only love who was able to believe in her even when she doubted herself. The only man who cooked dinners even when she wasn't there. Who thought about new beginnings when she only wanted to escape. And as she watched him walk away again, without drama, without any promise of return, she knew with absolute certainty that nothing she said or did would have the power to rebuild what she herself had caused to crumble. Because loving is a daily choice. And she stopped choosing. Until there was no more time. But what she didn't yet know, was that he was no longer alone. And what would follow would be the clearest reflection that sometimes love blossoms again where you least expect it. And that, for those who betray, regret is never enough to turn back time. Ethan didn't return home that night, nor any other. After the definitive conversation with Olivia, he closed not only a chapter of his life, but also the version of himself that he had insisted on loving alone for so long. The peace she saw in his face wasn't feigned, it was the consequence of an exhausted heart that chose not to carry any more of what the other had dropped. From that day on, he moved on. Not in a hurry, not seeking to replace her, but with the firmness of someone who knew he needed to rebuild himself from the pain. He moved to a neighboring city, sought new paths, frequented new places, and there, without looking, he met someone who didn't make him forget Olivia, but helped him understand how far he had already been emotionally from her long before that betrayal happened. It wasn't a new love that arrived with promises, but with presence. A serene woman, soft-spoken, who respected his silences, who didn't try to fill voids, but offered companionship. With her, Ethan rediscovered the tranquility of sleeping peacefully and waking up in gratitude. The two of them built something discreet, solid, without rushing to label or prove anything to anyone. And that, for him, was enough. For the first time in a long time, his life had a direction again without him having to tear himself apart to keep someone close. Olivia, for her part, faced a completely different reality. In the first months after the separation, she tried to move on as if it were just another ending. She tried to justify to herself that she had been confused, that she was in a phase of rediscovery, that she needed to experience something new. She went out, frequented crowded places, surrounded herself with noisy people. But the emptiness remained. And it was a heavy silence that no party could silence. Ethan's unanswered messages, his gaze the last time they saw each other, his absence in the places where she expected to bump into him by chance, all of this began to suffocate her. When she finally understood that he wouldn't come back, not out of pride, but out of self-respect, something inside her gave way. The memories that had seemed distant before returned with force. The small gestures, the everyday moments, the details she hadn't valued while she had them. Olivia began to relive old scenes with a lump in her throat. Not because she wanted to go back to the past, but because now she understood the value of what she had destroyed. She tried to move on. She met other men. He tried to convince himself that he could love again. But no gesture touched her in the same way, no presence could fill the void Ethan left. Not because he was irreplaceable, but because the love she received from him was so complete that, after experiencing it, everything else seemed shallow. He tried to reinvent himself professionally, tried new hobbies, new circles. But the way people looked at him had also changed. Many who had previously looked up to her began to distance themselves. Friends drifted away, family members looked on with sorrow. She felt the silent judgment of those who realized the loss she herself had caused. And that's when true regret set in. Not the regret of being taken or of being left, but the regret of realizing that she had destroyed with her own hands the only thing that had always sustained her. One night, alone at home, she decided to reread the old diary she kept at the beginning of their marriage. The first pages spoke of how safe she felt by his side, how he looked at her as if she were unique, about their plans for the future. And then came the page where she had written, years before, "I promise never to forget everything he does for me, even on the hardest days." Upon finishing reading, Olivia cried like never before. It wasn't tears of longing, it was grief. Grief for a version of herself that died the moment she chose to turn her back on everything she had built. And this kind of grief is not shared. It is silent, solitary, and eternal. The man who took Ethan's place that night at the prom disappeared as easily as he had appeared. He never intended to stay. For him, Olivia was just a brief chapter in a life that couldn't hold roots. He vanished without warning, without explanation, leaving only the echo of promises he never intended to keep. And that disappearance was the trigger for Olivia to understand that what she experienced with that man was never love, it was escape. An escape from herself, from routine, from emotional responsibility. And when all of that crumbled, there was nowhere left to hide. Years passed. Ethan remarried in a discreet ceremony, surrounded by people who knew his story but celebrated the present. He had a serene look, an even more mature demeanor, an immense affection for the woman by his side. The two lived a simple but happy life. They adopted a dog, renovated a house together, laughed at silly things, and spent Sundays reading on the sofa. Nothing grand, just pure love, as he had always wished. Olivia, on the other hand, continued living between attempts at new beginnings and unfinished cycles. She never managed more than fleeting relationships. With each new person she met, she sought to reclaim what she once had. But the love she lost was unique because it was built with patience, respect, and truth. And that cannot be replicated in haste. Time hasn't erased their history, but it has placed each in their rightful place. Ethan moved on peacefully. Olivia was left with the consequences. Regret, as she learned, doesn't bring back what was lost. And forgiveness, even if it comes, doesn't guarantee a return. In the end, she understood that betrayal isn't just about breaking a pact, it's about abandoning a love she once believed would last forever. She destroyed what she swore to protect. And nothing is more just than living with the echo of that loss. Now that you've made it this far, tell us, what did you think of this story? Leave your comment, we want to know your opinion. And of course, subscribe to the channel because stories like this are yet to come, always filled with emotion, truth, and profound lessons. This story shows, with all its nuances, that betrayal is a choice that comes at a price. And that price is often the loss of a love that will never be found again. It destroys homes, breaks bonds, and extinguishes promising futures. Everything that was built with care and patience can crumble in seconds when one chooses the path of lies. And don't forget, this channel does not support, under any circumstances, any type of betrayal. Here, we tell painful stories to raise awareness, evoke emotion, and provoke reflection. Because love is a decision, and so is betrayal. Until next time.